morning, everyone, and thank you for joining us for April's edition of Health Bites with Region 3. We've missed you. It's been January was the last time we were able to be with you. So we are pleased to welcome this month's speaker, Margaret Foster. Margaret is the Evidence Synthesis and Scholarly Dissemination Librarian and the head of the Center for Systematic Reviews and the Research Synthesis at the Medical Sciences Library, Texas A&M University. She is the co-author of the first book written on systematic reviews for librarians, Assembling the Pieces of a Systematic Review, a guide for librarians, and recently piecing together systematic reviews and other evidence synthesis. She received the Presidential Impact Award from Texas A&M University in 2018 and the Lucretia W. McClure Excellence in Education Award in 2024 from the Medical Library Association. In today's Health Bites, our speaker will give a presentation called Navigating Systematic Reviews with AI, Best Practices and Challenges. Thank you, Margaret, for so much for being with us today as our guest speaker. And now I will turn everything over to you.
I'm so glad to be here with y'all talking about AI, and I have a little addition to that title. We're going to add in the term automation, and I'm going to talk about what that means and its connection in with AI as we go along. I also want to let you know that answering in the Q&A will be my team. I'm so excited that we're all formed together. So Kyle Holland is here. He has helped me on a couple of webinars and Health Bites before, and I'll introduce Danny LaPrez and Esmeralda Rogers to kind of flesh out the rest of our team serving at the Medical Sciences Library and our evidence synthesis services. So throughout this, I don't really have time to take questions as we're going along, but they're going to be collecting and answering your questions. And I'm sure you're going to ask some questions I don't know the answer to. So we're going to collect those and figure those out. But I have a little poll here for you at the beginning. So it looks like it is working. Getting some in there. So I'm going to do this here at the beginning, and then after the talk, we'll kind of see, did you change your rating? The other thing I'll let y'all know is right now I can't see the comments box, so I'll have to check that kind of at the end, more towards the end, and hopefully we'll get to several of those as we go. So it looks like a lot of people feel maybe a little bit more middle of the road. And the meh is what I would call that expression area. Okay, so it's going to be able to keep collecting your responses there, so feel free to keep marking. So during this session, I hope that we can talk through some of the principles and applications of AI and automation to systematic review processes. And we'll talk the most about searching, but we will talk about other ones. I have some steps in there where you could think about how would you apply AI into your workflow. And then we're going to end talking about the challenges and the ethical use of AI. And so I kind of broke it into 3 sections here. Not too much about terminology, but I feel that there are some terms that you need to know in order to understand the different types of AI tools that are out there. I use this picture of a lighthouse because I liked that idea of having an understanding of what AI is and what it can do and not do. You can help to your clients see where the rocks are as they're trying to navigate this very disruptive time of AI and all these wonderful tools coming up. And sometimes it's hard to know, like, is that really useful? Will it work? So let's dive in here. So this picture is a picture that I asked Copilot to create. I asked Copilot to design an image of artificial intelligence and its different parts. And this is the picture it gave me. So I really like the colors on it, although you cannot, there's many words in there you cannot read. So here's where automation, I kind of added that idea in here. So automation is the big overall idea. These are things that don't just help with the task. They don't really replace a human in it, but they're kind of like those more tedious things. Then when we get in further in the artificial intelligence, that's where it can start to simulate those tasks, and where the human is involved in that can be different for the different types. We're going to talk much more now about the machine learning and these different types of learning that it can do, because that's where you're going to see the biggest differences between the different tools that are out there. And that's where I did my deep dive to create this presentation for y'all. So machine learning covers the broad idea. And then you've got supervised, unsupervised, and active learning. And then deep learning, that's where you see the generative AI, which is what kind of, I think, brought all of our attention more to it. And that's where the LLMs, the large language models, falls in. So let's look at that just a little bit more closely. So the big difference with the machine learning, rather than just like those automated techniques and things, is that it can identify patterns and process the data. And depending on its type of learning that it's doing, it can refine that performance. So when you look at the learning types, this is where you're going to see the biggest difference between what those tools can do and how to evaluate them. And I hope that I can talk y'all through this as we look at some examples. But this slide, you'll be able to go back to it and kind of see what that definition was as we talk about the different types. So supervised learning, this is where you give the tool a labeled set, and then that trains the tool, and then you could give it an unlabeled set and have it label it. And so like it says here, some of those examples are like the spam detectors that we have. Unsupervised learning, this is those things that do kind of the clustering or the organizing of things. So an example of that would be like Carrot 2 does that. So this is where you're not expecting it to kind of label things, rather it's showing you how something might be organized. And active learning is just kind of an in between those two things. And I'll point out an example of that later on when we talk about screening. This is where you, instead of in supervised learning where you might just be giving it a data set, this is where you're a little bit more picky about how you're giving it those labels. And then as you're going through, it can start ranking things. So a lot of the tools that we have now for screening and systematic reviews, like Covidence, they do, they re-rank things as you're training it. The deep learning, this is where we have the most disruptive things, right? This is where that generative AI comes in, and I have a slide coming up that's just about that. But this is just to show you those, how to think about the different types that are out there. And this helped me a lot in understanding the differences in how they're validating them. So when we're thinking about the deep learning types, of course, we've got the GPTs, the generative types. There are a few other types that fall into this category, and predictive is one of those. And these tools are used a lot for like customer behavior and things like that. Assistive deep learning, this is tools that can recognize objects and things like that. But we're going to be spending the most time talking about, of course, the generative types of AI, and then there will be plenty of examples that are of the other type of machine learning, like I talked about. Okay. And then we get into the large language models, which has caused, everybody to want to become experts at prompt engineering and things like that. And so basically it's able to talk in a natural language back to people and give responses. And one term that I used, that I learned about as I was reading more on how to define things, is this idea of human in the loop. And that's knowing where to put that human into whatever tool you're using to ensure quality. And so you might see that sometimes in when they're talking about the tools.
Margaret.
Okay.
Oh, never mind.
Yes.
Oh, it's okay. We had a slide overlapping, so I wasn't sure if that was supposed to look that way, but we're good now as you've moved on.
Oh,
Thanks.
okay. Thank you.
Sure.
Okay. Okay, so we're going to spend most of our time talking about the tools that we've seen coming up for systematic review processes and the research that's showing up in there. And hopefully some of those definitions I just gave you will help to understand these. I asked Copilot what it thought AI tools, how it could enhance systematic review methods. And this is what Copilot told me. So it said, oh, it's going to improve the speed, it's going to enhance the accuracy and reduce workload. So let's see how we feel about that as we talk about these. So this is the review cycle. This is how I think about systematic reviews and their processes. And I'm showing you this as this will be kind of my organizing principle. So the big circle is showing you the different phases along the outside in the black. So you start off with your idea, the proposal. That's where you're thinking about, okay, what's my question going to be? Is this feasible? Has somebody else done this review before? All of those things. Your protocol, of course, figuring out your methods. And then you have your production, which is what I think about when you're in the major parts of working on the project, finishing all the searches and things. And then, of course, writing up the paper. The rest of the steps here is things that could happen after you've published the paper, preserving the data, promoting the review, collecting all the impact of that project, and then perhaps at some point updating. Throughout all of these phases, there's all these different processes that you're doing, and that's what spells out the pieces here. And so what we're going to do is go through each of these overall arching processes and talk about potential places where AI has shown that maybe it's helpful, maybe there's been some research in there, and we'll spend the most amount of time on the identify processes, but you can see the different ones here. Now for the planning and the summarizing, I feel like there's probably a lot of other speakers out there who've talked a lot about using AI for writing or other things that are kind of fall into some of these processes. I'm going to focus the most part on those processes that are more specific to systematic reviews, because I feel like there's lots of other great talks out there on those things, but I will highlight them a little bit. So this is a great scoping review that I found that looked at the use of the deep learning tools, the LLMs, and looking across how have people tried to apply those to systematic review processes. As you can see from this pie chart, for the most part, they've looked at the three areas of searching, screening, and data extraction. And of course, we know those are very time-consuming parts in the review, with the GPTs being used the most often. And there's so many different ones out there. And the biggest issue that they highlighted in this article is validation. And that's what I'm going to talk about throughout the rest of our talk today, because to me, that's the most important thing. That's why we're all wondering, like, is this useful? Well, has it been validated, right? Like, can we really trust it? Okay. So for the planning processes, these are all of those things like taking notes and communication. It could also be framing the question, trying to figure out, has this been done before, those kinds of things. So one thing that we've seen is that whenever we're talking about asking LLMs to summarize or give us the big picture, they can be missing important articles, of course, lacking context and things like that. And the biggest thing is you have such difference between when you're asking an LLM the same question, you might get a different answer at different times, or of course, you will get different answers across them. So, like I said, there's probably been lots of talks about this that are out there. Because it's not super specific to systematic reviews, I want to focus on the searching part, but I did want to mention this part of the planning. The biggest thing that we're wondering is, can it help us with searching, right? And so the potential is, could it optimize the search? Could it make it more efficient? Make sure we're not like, could it evaluate our search? Could it help with that translation? All of those kinds of things. And so the big question would be, at what point also do you need that human interaction, right? So of course you're going to check anything that it developed. Some people have proposed the idea that, oh, we'll do a much broader search than we've ever done before, because now the AI tool can do a great job of screening and things like that. So some are saying, oh, just do a wider search than we have. And we know over time that the amount of articles and citations for any search that anybody's going to go through is just going to keep growing as the databases themselves keep growing. So some of the things also listed in here are things like deduplication. We know that's kind of the bane of searching for systematic reviews because many of the tools we've had haven't been that great at deduping. I put an article on the resources list that does compare several deduplication tools that are out there. And so I would put these maybe in that realm of automation tools. And what I liked about it, just because it went along with what we had and what we had been doing, is that Covidence was highly rated in this, and that's a tool that we use. But Ovid was also rated highly in there. But my only thing with that is, what about all those things you're getting that aren't from an Ovid one? So I thought that was a kind of a strange deduplicator to use. There's other options in there, and you can see from the article the options that there are. For screening, I do have some slides coming up that'll go through some of the research, but some of that is being built into the tools. And that's where I was talking a little earlier about the active learning. And that's where, as you're marking things, some of the tools will start to reorder the upcoming articles depending on as you're putting them in. And that, I think, is going to be a trend that continues. We're going to start to see more automated tools and AI kind of embedded into tools that we're already using. And lastly, on this screen, I'll just mention that, even the tools of finding full text, like we see in EndNote or Zotero, when you ask it to find all the full text, that's an automated tool. So we're already using a lot of these ideas. We just might not have thought about them in that realm before. Okay. So what about tools designed for research, for searches? So when we look at LLMs for designing searches, this is where I talked before, like we see the errors in there. They don't always have the syntax that's needed. Maybe they can't even get to it because it's not part of their data set for like a subscription-based database. So maybe not for designing the search itself, but perhaps the use could come in finding synonyms or terms in other languages. I know I've done, searches for students where we wanted to focus on a particular area in the world, and it was really helpful that that student spoke the language sometimes, that we could search in those other languages because we were trying to search other databases. I think that has a lot of potential, and that way we could really be global in our searching and comprehensive. And perhaps also looking for those related organization and conferences that perhaps their titles are in other languages as well, that it could help with that. So there's a lot of research being done in this area, and what they're saying is to break down those complex requests into separate prompts, maybe building on each other, and that what we really need are templates to use for tasks, and to know like which ones are showing more promise. And I have some more research coming up as we're going through that's going to talk about this. And of course there's errors that we can put into that, so maybe we don't give it the context and things like that. So there's that optimization, but even if you do the best search, it might not be reproducible or reliable, right? So I think, to me, this is an area where definitely we're still needed. There's nothing great that's out there right now that can do this, but maybe for some automated parts of it, like these tools for kind of organizing a set of results to help see those patterns. That might be, these have been proven to be useful. So things like the Yale Mesh Analyzer, or Carrot 2, which gives you more of a visual results of your search, and that's where it does those clustering things, like I was mentioning towards the beginning. I also added another tool on here called Lit Search R. This is coming out of research being done by environmental reviewers. So to me, they needed something because they don't have things like Medline for a lot of their topics. So they were trying to figure out how to get the most out of Web of Science. And so what you see with this is they're basically going in, running a search in something like Web of Science or other very large databases, and having it show them frequencies. So it might be useful if you have a topic that's very broad and you're not sure of which direction to go and what the keywords might be. I'm still trying to figure out where this might be the most useful for projects I'm working on. But to me, the first three here have been the most useful to me. But I wanted to put this one on there because I think it still has its place. So citation seeking, this is where, of course, we're looking for the cited and citing citations. And this falls, like I said, more into that like automated sort of role. I found Citation Chaser to be the most useful out of the tools that I've seen. And in this one, you can get your included articles in here, and then it can show you who did they cite and who cited them, and then remove the duplicates. They don't have the analysis feature working on this tool yet. I would love that, because one issue I see a lot in doing citation searching is being able to sort from there which ones should you actually add in to maybe their covidence or rayon, or however they're doing their screening. Because we know when people write articles, of course, they cite a lot of things that aren't studies, that don't really relate to the topic you're doing. So I feel like there should be one more level of sorting that should happen before you do the screening. So I'm still kind of waiting to see that tool. If anybody knows of one, please let us know, because that'll be awesome. Okay. Another tool I found to be really useful that kind of falls into this area, and I don't know if you would consider it automated or maybe it's just a cool tool, but I did want to mention it here because we like it. This is the publisher parish. So it's actually made to help people to find who's citing their work. But we found it also to be really useful for searching Google or Google Scholar, and then being able to turn those results into like an RAS file. It can also search other places that you can see here if you have access to them. And so there's some great uses for it, but I did want to add that in here kind of along with those other tools. Okay. So for translating search, and this would fall into that automation type, I like to use the polyglot. It's really useful if you're, for example, trying to go from like PubMed into, say, like Embase or in Ovid or something like that. It will help with the syntax. So there's a lot of caveats with this one. So it's a great tool. I find it especially helpful for Cochrane Central myself. It's a great tool for helping with that syntax. Kind of, some people have done it like in Word and copy and replace, things like that. But the other thing to know is that of course, it's not going to go and look up the headings. So it's not going to be able to like translate the mesh headings into CINAHL headings or something like that. But it's a tool that's out there and can be helpful. And so it's great to try it out and see if it works for you. Okay, so screening. This is where I want to kind of show the different types that's out there. So of course, you can screen in Covidence and Rayon and all these other tools that are out there. There's also people are trying to use other tools to, once they have maybe sorted a certain set, then to use use a different tool to see, are there some that we shouldn't even bother looking at? So I hope I'm explaining that well. And so that's what this tool Doctor could help with. This is a free tool. I've just started playing with it on one project that's showing a little bit of promise. But like I said, I'm still like in that validation mode. Like, can I really use this? Can we really trust it? So we're piloting it with our team to see, how do y'all feel? Did it sort these well? So what we did is we took a set of articles that had already been marked in or out, and then we fed that into the tool that's for classifying. And then we said, okay, now here's a set that's not classified yet, classify it. So what it does with the training set is it builds a model, and then when you add in the unlabeled one, it labels it with using that model. And so this is, completely based on our data. And so what we see is when you're validating these types of tools, which fall into that machine learning, but not the deep learning that the LLMs use, these are things that you can validate them. They are going to be the same every time. And it's much more transparent what it's doing. With the LLMs, although it has shown promise, you won't necessarily get the same thing every time. And it's going to be different across the different tools that are out there. And it's going to depend on the type of prompt that you give it as well. So this project that just came out this year is where they looked at 4 different LLMs, and they tried different types of prompts with data from 10 already completed systematic reviews. So of course, they already knew which articles were in or out. And it shows a lot of promise. I thought this was really interesting. I don't know if this is a commercially available. I'm thinking maybe this might be a tool that they subscribe to. I'm not sure about that. But it had really good sensitivity. But there was one caveat here, which I found like to be a pretty big issue. So when they were giving it full text, they were only doing the things that they could get for free from like PNC. So this could, this would be an issue if you were trying to do things with other um, full text, and we know that's going to happen most of the time. So that's that big caveat in there. But it is showing some promise that maybe with more better prompting, which probably has a lot of details about the criteria and things they're looking for, that maybe this might be a way that it could save some time. Okay, so next, there's been a lot of talk about perhaps these AI tools helping with extraction and evaluation. And talking with my clients, this is where most of them are very hesitant to have a tool to do this. I feel like with screening or maybe even with searching, they're a little bit more open to using a tool. With this one, most are like, nah, I don't know that it can do that. So robot reviewer's been one that's been talked about a lot. It's pretty limited in what it can do. It says that it can do some data extraction, but it's very minimal, and it only looks at RCTs and only the criteria from the Cochrane list, which is fine. I mean, that's a validated list, but I haven't gotten it to work great on anything I've given it. We've seen some things from Chat PDF where maybe you build some questions that you ask of a PDF into an LLM. A lot of the research I've seen has been using something called Claude Pro. And so I put some research in here that goes over using these different LLMs for these different processes. So you can look at that. I feel like this is the part, like I said, where most people are the most hesitant and want to know a lot more information about how it works. And I think this is also another part where that human interaction is going to be really important. At what stage are you putting that in and having things checked? But there is also that promise of maybe minimizing that error, as human error in the translation from reading the PDF and filling out the data extraction form has been an issue for many years. In this section, in this process, combining and explaining, this is where this is the part of the paper where they've done their results and now they're trying to visualize the data for the reader. They want to explain it. You might think about this section being the discussion section part as well. And so LLMs show some promise in that you could potentially upload the data in and maybe get some insights. So maybe it doesn't do all of the analysis or things like that, but maybe it points out things or patterns that you didn't see before, because that's one of the great strengths of any of these tools, is pointing out patterns. I did find this tool here, the Metamar. I haven't seen anything talking about is it great or not, but I did think it was interesting that it was a free tool out there to help with meta-analysis. And so I'll be curious if there's any research out there validating or showing its usefulness. So getting into the summarizing and sharing, of course, one of the great strengths that we've seen of LLMs is in the summarizing. I know I'm fortunate that I have Copilot it within my Outlook right now, and it can summarize like emails for me and let me know like the gist of maybe a long conversation across emails. So we know that this is an area that it can do well in. And of course, some of the issues that we have is we know that sometimes it gives erroneous citations. Maybe it can lack that context and experience. I know that people are also worried about, okay, if you upload something into the tool, it's storing that information. So you would need to use one that you knew it wasn't doing that. You need the assurance of privacy and things like that. I know I saw just recently NSF said that it would require any grant reviewers not to use any of those kind of AI tools for doing any summarizing because of that fear of it taking that information and privacy concerns. So there's tools out there, many tools, of course, for doing this. And some are popping up right now, like Elicit or Consensus, that are saying, oh, we can do your whole systematic review, including this part as well. So I did include this article here talking about trying to use Elicit after they already completed a systematic review to see how it would work and would it come up with the same thing that they did. What's interesting is that they did it 3 times and they got 3 different results from doing that. I kind of highlighted the results section here, and it shows that 17 articles were missed that were found by humans. So I love how it's kind of humans versus AI here. But it did find 3 that the human searchers didn't. So they did find that those articles wouldn't have made a difference, but still that's 3 that were missed. So perhaps that could be a use of some of these the searching and things like that could be to see, okay, have I missed anything? Maybe it's like of a check. But it was interesting that reproducibility, even within that same tool, getting 3 different answers for the same prompt was, I thought, very interesting. So how can we integrate these tools? Especially when you're not sure, like, is this useful? Should we try this? So to me, the most important thing right now is piloting them and making sure that it's going to work, and deciding which of those processes you want to try to use it in. I feel that after everything I've seen, that screening, it shows the most promise because that's a binary option, especially at the relevancy stage. Is it in or out? Is it relevant? I shouldn't say is it in or out. Is it relevant or not? And with the fact that you could train it up by screening, some number and then giving that and then it telling and then kind of it re-ranking things. I think like I said before, we're going to see a lot more of that already embedded. So I put together these steps here in talking about that. And probably the trickiest part here is, okay, so how do you validate it? What are your measures? So these are some of the measures that you could think about. And I put in this article here where they did talk about some of the different ways that these tools have been evaluated. Of course, there's all the things around the tool itself about its usefulness and things like that. But then we can start thinking about how much time did it save? And you could put a cost on that. How did it impact the results? So in the one I just talked about with Elicit, they did go back and see, would that have impacted the actual results of the search? So not just, oh, it gave me these 3 articles that we didn't found, but they looked at those 3 articles and they looked at how they would have been combined into the final answer and found, no, that wouldn't have made a difference. And then we have all the validity outcomes, and that to me is the biggest area, is figuring out, okay, what are those measures? So that if you were trying to pick between different potential tools, you could know, like, what is the precision? I love the one, that number needed to read before you get to an article that you want, kind of thing. And of course, sensitivity and specificity. So let's get into those validation issues and the other challenges of these tools. So one thing here is we see the core outcomes. So how do we decide whether or not it did what we wanted? They're not well defined. There's no standards out there. Another issue, of course, is bias. So bias in, bias out kind of idea. Prompt engineering, that varies widely. So there's big differences from those zero shot to those multiple prompts that you could like build upon. And how do we compare that with with the humans that might be doing that work? Also, I've kind of pointed this out a little bit before, but I wanted to put this table in there. When you're looking at those differences between that supervised, unsupervised, all of those kinds of learning versus the LLMs, which is based on deep learning, you see that's where with those other machine learning things, that's much more reproducible than when you get to the deep learning, where it's not reproducible. And we saw with Elicit, 3 times they gave it one prompt and they got 3 different answers. And so that to me is going to make a difference. I feel like those things that are doing the supervised, unsupervised learning, those kinds of things, that's going to be more easily adopted just because we can validate it much more easy and have much more assurance. I think it's going to be a little bit longer before we're going to see that same feeling towards the LLMs, and also the numbers, right? Like show that it has great precision every time or something like that. So if we look across all the challenges, not just the validation issues, we've got the bias that we know could be in there, because there's, the bias in the data, there's the bias in the articles, and we already know that when we're doing systematic reviews. That's why we look for risk of bias in the articles. But then that can be compounded here if you don't have that human in the loop looking at it, right? We've talked about data privacy, and of course that's been an issue from the beginning with these tools, when to put it in. A lot of talk around intellectual property issues here. And for quality and reliability, we also have the accountability part of this, and we're going to talk about that in a minute with some of the standards. And then thinking about the social and the environmental impact, I saw one thing, and I hadn't really put this on a list yet until now, that over reliance on these tools. I was like, oh, that could become an issue. I know, of course, professors are already thinking about that for students, but we're going to see it going the other way as well. And then some people are going to resistance to this. I talked to a professor just the other day, and she was like, oh, I haven't done it. I've never used any of those tools yet. And so I was like, okay, I won't talk to you about that with your project then. So you're going to see different people having different reactions to it. And I think that's where understanding the difference between the different types of tools that are out there, and it's going to help in that conversation. So how do we address these challenges? I put a list of things here, and you can kind of see how they match back up with what we had before, so I won't go through all of those. But what I found to be the most interesting was this idea in doing more research is doing the studies within a review. So while you're doing a review, and of course not every team is going to have the wherewithal to do something like this, but to do that pilot and to publish on that and to say, okay, this is what happened. I think that's going to be really interesting, and it's going to help others to know, okay, I can trust this, or I can use that process to do my review. They've shown that it worked. And so I think we're going to see more and more of this. And of course, later adopters are going to have that benefit of seeing that. But for some things, we may even have data that we can test against it already and do those retrospective kinds of things. But the main thing that we need right now is transparency, and we need standards and guidelines to help us to know when to use what. And I think that's coming. I just don't think we're quite there yet on everything. But I am going to show you some standards that we know of. So these first standards here, this is about if you have somebody who's doing a systematic review on AI interventions. And so there's a Prisma now for AI healthcare, and there's a consort for the clinical interventions or studies that could be published on those. So we have standards for reporting of AI interventions. And then the International Committee of Medical Journal Editors has come out with this addition to their guidelines on authors and authorship, and basically saying that an AI, an LLM, and they've got different chatbots and other things listed here, should not be listed as an author, but it should be acknowledged and explained and be fully transparent about what you did, and that bringing back into that idea of accountability, that the humans would be responsible for anything that I got wrong. So definitely keeping the human in the loop there, and using these more of like assistive technology there. This is an ongoing guideline called RAISE, and here you can see different groups of people and their different roles that they see the different groups playing in using AI responsibly. And you see the evidence synthesis person is here, so the authors are there. And basically it's saying you're responsible for your synthesis, tell us what you did, and make sure you're being ethical about it. So you can see all of those things. And this has continued to adapt as more voices are getting added into it. It's available on the Open Science Framework, and the link is in the resources if you want to read more about it. There's this organization, the International Collaboration for Automation of Systematic Reviews. It started about 10 years ago. They had a meeting last year. I think they're having a meeting later this year. They do go and have some sessions in some of the other big conferences that are out there. It's great. I like to go in here and see what events they're doing, read some papers. It gives me an idea of what's coming up. So that's a great organization to go and check out. So kind of to wrap up here, maybe we have a few minutes for some looking at your questions. I think there's some tools out there that look great, but right now it's important to kind of know what's out there and know about the validation and how they're created. So before really diving in, you probably want to find out a lot more about that part. And just being aware of these issues and the standards that are out there, I think is really important for now. What do you think? I decided to call this the meow meter. And let's see, did you change your rating? Are we going to see some differences here? And I'll have to go back and look at how y'all marked the first one, but I feel like we're maybe leaning a little bit more to the smiley happy kitty. I'm not sure. Maybe a little bit more in the middle than last time, but that one will stay up so you can keep marking. But thank you for giving me that. I was just so curious if anything I said would change. For me myself, I'm a little bit more in the meh, maybe slightly towards a smile, but it really depends on what we're talking about as far as processes go. So I'm gonna stop sharing my slides here in a second. But I did want to point out that there's a free series from Cochrane Training all about AI. And what they did is for each process, like they have a whole session just on searching. And then they just did a session on screening. They'll go into a lot more detail than I was able to do here. You can join live, but they are 4 in the morning. Central Time. So what I've done is I've just signed up for them and then I watch the videos later. You don't have to have signed up to watch the videos later. They're just freely available on this link here. And I think they're doing their last one in June. So I'm going to stop sharing here.
So I know we have quite a few questions, Margaret, and so we want to be able to let you get to as many as possible. So
Sure.
we'll go ahead and put the link to our survey for CE in the chat. And, we're willing to keep the room open as long as you're willing to stay. So we just appreciate so many people coming and having such great questions. So I'm going to go ahead and put that survey link in, and then we'll just kind of roll with the questions.
Okay, so I'm kind of scrolling through questions here. So one question I see is about, I think the overall Prisma incorporating reporting the use of AI in the future. I hope so. I feel like other reporting standards have already kind of included that. So I would expect a new Prisma, I don't know what they call it, 2025, or would it just be an update? I think they need to they definitely need to put that in there, but we already see the other ones saying that. Yeah, so privacy should be a criteria for evaluating a tool. That's a great point. I'll add that onto my list. I know I won't be able to get through all of these, but thank y'all for putting these in. I always learn so much whenever I do these. From my team, is there one big burning question or repeat question that you've seen that I really should get to before we end today? Got 3 minutes.
There's a couple about environmental impact.
Okay. So one thing that people have talked about the environmental impact is thinking about the cost of, I think it's like the energy of it, also the potential people losing their job, and then other people on the other side will say, well, there'll be new jobs. So I do know that there's environmental impact. I don't know that I know all of the different things that we need to think about. And they do cover that in the Cochrane talk. So if you want to go and check that out, but I know I'm definitely not the expert on that side of it. Okay. Yeah, so the link for the Cochrane training is on the resources page. I know it's not in the original slide deck. I'm sorry about that, but it's at the bottom of the resources PDF. So that has all of the references that I cited and any links that I had as well. So I'm trying to, is there anything else? Oh, this is a great question about the differences and similarities between prompt engineering and database search strategies. I do think that it's going to become like a new type of literacy that we're going to need to develop. This is where we could really use some standards. So I know whenever I was learning about how to design searches for systematic reviews, I could go to the Cochrane list of standards, and this is how you design a search strategy. And I kept using that over and over again. It'd be great if we had that same kind of standards or guidelines for prompt engineering. And I know there have been lots of different acronyms that are out there about how to design them. I do see that as going to be something that grows. I think one of the biggest problem is the differences in the LLMs can vary widely. And so I think right now people are still trying to get a footing. So we're still kind of at the beginning, but I think that that's a really good point. I do like that idea about the English only being possibly being overcome by AI. I know people are still a little bit leery of its translating abilities in different languages, but that is one of my big hopes, is that we're going to be much more global. And we're right at 11 now. I'm going to collect all these questions, and I thank y'all for all of them. Like I said, I always learn a lot when I do this. I hope that this talk helped you, and thank you for coming.
Well, Margaret, thank you so much. As always, your presentations are so appreciated, and we always have huge audiences. So really thank you so much for being with us today. And we look forward to everyone joining us next month for the next edition of Health Bytes. We appreciate it.
Thanks for watching. This video was produced by the network of the National Library of Medicine. Select the circular channel icon to subscribe to our channel, or select a video thumbnail to watch another video from the channel.